Welcome to Chasing Life. You have no doubt heard of E. coli and Salmonella. But this summer, there is another name that's showing up in the headlines, and that is Cyclospora. Now, I got to tell you, I've covered a lot of outbreaks over the last quarter century, but this one has been a little baffling. We know, first of all, that this is a tiny parasite linked to contaminated produce and certain water sources that can cause weeks of diarrhea, cramping, and frankly, other miserable symptoms. We also know that thousands of people are already sick across the country and that the numbers are rising. As of this recording, the hardest hit state is my home state of Michigan, Ohio a distant second. The numbers are going to still need to be confirmed by the CDC, but just the counts of those two states put it on track now to be the largest recorded outbreak of Cyclospora in the United States since 1990. And I think the most vexing part of this is that we really don't have a handle on why there's been this massive spike in cases. Government and state agencies have not been able to definitively point to a single source or to a particular culprit, although they are starting to zero in. That is the confusing part. At this moment, it's not even clear if this is just one big outbreak or if it's a number of smaller unrelated outbreaks. So on today's show, we're going to talk to Dr. Jennifer McIntyre. She's a microbiologist and also founder of Food Safety Strategy, which consults with food companies about how to deal with food safety, including Cyclospora. We will talk about why it's so important to pinpoint the source of this outbreak. And again, I can tell you, after covering outbreaks for the last 25 years, these are complicated. They are sort of these Sherlock Holmes level investigations. So we're going to talk about how these investigations start and hopefully how they ultimately solve the mystery. Also, perhaps most importantly, we'll tell you what you can realistically do to protect yourself beyond the standard guidance to wash your fruits and veggies. I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's chief medical correspondent, and this is Chasing Life. So how's your life been recently?
It's been a little crazy, but such is the life of a food safety professional.
Right. So how do you first find out about something like this? What's the first call you get?
You hear some industry rumors. You hear that something is going on. But also for this particular organism, for Cyclospora, it is seasonal, and so it's in some ways kind of expected, unfortunately.
So when you get a call like this, you're not that surprised, it sounds like, at least not initially.
When it's June, July, no, not that surprised.
So let's get to some basics. First of all, what is Cyclospora?
So Cyclospora is a single-celled parasite, and me being trained as a food microbiologist, that means a certain thing to me compared to bacteria or other types of organisms, much more complex than the E. coli or the Salmonella that we may hear about a bit more often. As a parasite, what this means to me is that it requires a host in order to multiply, to replicate. This is different than the bacteria that don't require hosts, and the needing to have a host for this organism, the only host is humans, it's people. So animals that we hear about, sometimes associated with outbreaks, cows or chickens or birds flying overhead, they're really not involved in situations like this. This really is a people problem. So humans are the only host, and the fact that the organism requires a host is a blessing and a curse.
So if humans are required for this parasite to replicate, reproduce, how do they, where does it come from in the first place then? It's not in animals, you're saying, requires
Correct.
Humans. So how does this cycle begin?
How it began in the first place, we simply don't know. It's kind of like, what's the origin of life? How do you trace it back? But at some point, this organism evolved, became what we now know as Cyclospora cayetanensis with a human host, and it just cycles through people. So it's people ingest it, and really what we're saying they're ingesting is Cyclospora that came from somebody else, from their feces.
From another human.
From another human. But it's not a direct fecal oral contamination, which we see with things like neurovirus or hepatitis A, or even E. coli or Salmonella. This organism is very peculiar in that it seems it needs a week or two outside of the host. So, say after somebody has defecated, takes a little bit of time before it becomes infectious and can make another person sick. And so while we always advocate for hand washing, here it's not the case where somebody was sick, they didn't wash their hands, they prepared food for someone else, and they immediately get sick. It's a slightly different mechanism here, and it creates a lot of challenges in outbreak investigations.
So that's really interesting, and obviously, you can start to imagine how that transmission occurs, but it's human to human, but not directly human to human. It's not what we refer to as fecal oral, like somebody's hands are contaminated, they touch something or they get it in their mouth. You're saying that probably another human infected the food or the water in some way, and that subsequently was the source of infection.
That's exactly right.
Paint a picture for me then. What would be a likely start to an outbreak like this?
If we look at outbreaks that have happened in the past, we usually hypothesize that there was water that was contaminated with raw sewage, including from somebody or maybe a few people who were carrying Cyclospora. And we're not really sure if people are able to carry it and not show symptoms. So we have to keep that within the realm of possibility, these asymptomatic carriers. But certainly when people are sick, they're shedding Cyclospora, and we see it's referred to as explosive diarrhea. So there's a lot of feces then that may have these oocysts, the Cyclospora, in them. And if that gets into water systems, and that water is then used for irrigation, for even washing equipment, if that water is in a lake. These are different ways that people may become exposed in a large scale.
The Cyclospora does need humans to replicate, as you said. So it's shed through diarrhea, through fecal matter, gets into the water supply. The parasite can still survive until it gets into another human?
It seems to be pretty hardy. It does go through the sporulation process when it's outside of the host, transitioning from the not infectious form into an infectious form. And scientists aren't really sure of why or how exactly that happens, how long it takes, how long it persists in each state, the infectious and not infectious state. There's a lot about this organism that we do not understand.
It's really interesting. So it's hardy enough, it sporulates, it can eventually then infect another human being. It starts to reproduce, replicate itself within that human being's body, and the person gets sick.
Yes, and that replication within the body seems to take between a couple of days up to a couple of weeks before the person shows symptoms of illness, which makes it very difficult then to figure out how were they exposed.
And also this up to 2 weeks before you might start to show symptoms. Can you give some context? Like what is it for E. coli or Salmonella?
So, of course, it always depends, but Salmonella and E. coli are generally shorter. So we're usually looking at that 3 to 4 days, maybe up to a week. There are some other foodborne illness pathogens that take even longer. So Listeria monocytogenes, an organism that's of great concern for pregnant women and the elderly, that one can take a month, even up to 2 months.
Wow, that's incredible. So as you said, and I'm probably one of these people who think, I'm probably going to focus on what I just ate. What did I have for dinner? Are there pathogens that get you sick that quickly?
Usually when you get sick that quickly, it's because there was a pathogen in the food that produced a toxin in the food, and your body reacts very quickly to that toxin that's been produced. When it's an actual infection that requires the organism to be alive, be in you, and to grow, it takes a little bit more time.
Right. So, but I think this is an important point for a lot of people. If it's an infection that's making you sick, it's probably not what you just ate. It's probably something that you've eaten days, maybe even weeks earlier. So this gets to the challenge of the investigation.
Absolutely.
Do you have any sense? So today's Tuesday. Every day there's new numbers that are coming out from the CDC in terms of how many people are confirmed to have the Cyclospora infection. Any sense of how many people are probably actually infected that may not seek medical care or get sick enough to need it?
That's a great question because a lot of people don't seek medical care. And for this organism, because it's diarrhea and people may be embarrassed or they may think it's going to go away, there are a lot of people who won't seek medical attention. And so CDC has provided some estimates for the variety of foodborne pathogens of for each case that is confirmed, how many for various reasons might not be confirmed. This one has one of those higher multipliers. And so the last CDC estimate that I saw was about 80, that for every case that is confirmed that's counted, there are probably 80 or so people who are not counted, but did actually have the illness. Now, with the media attention, I hope that people are more likely to seek medical attention, that maybe that multiplier is not quite as high, but still 80 is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, just I'm throwing around numbers right now, but let's say 2,000 confirmed cases, you're talking hundreds of thousands of potential infections out there, the vast majority of which are undiagnosed.
That's right.
You know, I did this story years ago about a spinach, an E. coli outbreak, and it was so fascinating, Doctor, in terms of how they actually conducted the investigation. It has many of the notes that we're hearing about with the cyclospora infection, asking people about their eating, obviously, trying to figure out what the sources are. And they ultimately traced it back to a particular farm. Is that the sort of story that we're going to hear with cyclospora, do you think?
Yes and no. Yes, in that hopefully there will be some identification of a source, whether that is a farm, some other product, or some other place where this all began. But I think where this organism and the number of cases here is different is that in all likelihood, this is not one outbreak. This is multiple outbreaks. And so there may be multiple sources. There probably are multiple sources. And so trying to tease these outbreaks apart is exceptionally difficult.
I think with the E. coli, they were able to do genetic testing. Is that sort of testing happening here?
It's not as easy to do for cyclospora. This technology, this scientific technique has been available on the bacterial side of things for many years. Bacteria are a lot simpler organisms. Their DNA, it's a lot easier to work with. Cyclospora is pretty complicated, and so to do it accurately, to do it quickly, and to do it in a reasonably cost-effective way, it is very different from the bacterial side. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is that for the bacteria, because they do grow outside of a host, we can stick them in a test tube, come back the next day, we have millions or billions of them. If we think that cyclospora, through epidemiology and through traceback, we think it's coming from a particular location and we try to find it there in the environment or in a food, it's very difficult to find enough to do the test, to perform that genetic analysis, because once it's outside of a person, you can't get it to grow. You don't have a lot of the genetic material to work with.
So are they doing this sort of testing, or is it just not worthwhile?
They are. CDC, it has really been the one to evolve the methodology in order to be able to do this, but this is not a standard test. The genetic testing for cyclospora is not something that your rank and file laboratory can do. Whereas on the bacterial side, it's become much more common, much more accessible from a lab perspective. So there are a number of challenges that make it more difficult when we see cases of cyclospora and are trying to determine, is this one outbreak or are there many outbreaks?
And you believe it's many outbreaks?
Absolutely.
Sounds like.
I feel very confident saying there are many things going on at the same time here. And that would hold with historical patterns where we see the summertime, June, July, a number of illnesses, often attributed to a few different sources or at least a few different suspects.
Much of this seems to be concentrated in Michigan and the upper Midwest. Does that make you feel like there might be at least one gigantic source here?
Clearly, something is going on in Michigan. And the health officials came out with some signals just yesterday, Monday. I hope that they hone in quickly. So they have pointed to lettuce or salad greens. But when you have so many cases of illness, and Michigan, the number of cases really is, I believe, record-setting, unfortunately. There must be something very large that's going on, and my hope is that that magnitude enables a more rapid identification and resolution of the issue.
Was there a failure here? Did something go wrong in order for this outbreak to happen?
I have to say, yes, there have to be failures because somehow this organism entered the system, whether it was food or a water system that was used to produce food or a water system that people were exposed to. We should not be consuming this organism.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we get back, whether you should be washing your produce with something other than water to try and protect yourself from this parasite. Stay with us. I've seen some of these questionnaires now, some of the ones that are going around in Michigan. And again, these are complicated. And I think we're painting a picture for the audience. You're talking about maybe what you ate up to 2 weeks earlier. I mean, it goes without saying that most people are probably not going to remember. But they did have a list of restaurants on there. Is that the most likely source, or is it vegetables that you may have bought in a grocery store?
It's hard to say. A lot of times the restaurants are implicated because people do remember that they ate at a restaurant. And so when a certain brand, a certain chain shows up, it becomes a little easier for investigators to kind of hone in on it and see, especially when people are not related to each other, ate independently at a certain location. It makes for a good opportunity for public health, for those investigators to gather more information. It's a little more difficult when we look at a grocery store because of the variety of items in a grocery store and the fact that many grocery stores are, even different chains, are carrying kind of similar items. It's just a little more difficult to tease those apart.
People still want to eat their veggies. Are there higher risk and lower risk veggies?
It's a little too soon to tell when you look at the list of items that have been implicated. Again, it's primarily an epidemiological linkage, what people report eating and then combining that with a trace back to see that there's a common source. But the list is pretty varied as I look at it. So we have herbs like cilantro and basil. We have leafy greens. We have some fruits like berries. Raspberries is one of the first outbreaks that was identified. So it's really surprisingly across the board. And if we think of something like water being a vehicle, then that could be associated with pretty much anything.
I guess what I was driving at is that you're told, obviously, that eating produce is important. You should eat your fruits and veggies, but also to wash them really well. And I'm curious, from a food safety standpoint, this is your area of expertise, what does washing them really well mean?
The recommendations from FDA, CDC, and others is always to wash your produce well under running water. So not just in a container where it's just kind of soaking in itself, but running water, rubbing the surface, peeling things that can be peeled, removing outer layers for things that have outer layers. But I think people need to recognize, and we as food safety professionals shouldn't mislead people into thinking that they can bring that risk down to zero. If that product has been contaminated, and especially if it's, hopefully in the coming days, if a type of food is identified as causing illness and there's a recall, people should recall it. People shouldn't think, well, I have a product that's been recalled, let me just wash it thoroughly. That would be very bad behavior. If there's contamination, it is very difficult to confidently say, I have removed all contamination. And so, yes, washing helps. Removing outer leaves or peeling may help, but risk is never zero. And so if people are concerned, they should talk to their healthcare providers to understand their risk, their circumstances, and make an informed decision.
Just going back to the washing, though, I mean, Wash under running water. And I don't mean to get overly reductionist about this, but okay, wash under running water. What about using things like vinegar or baking soda or anything else like that?
I know a lot of people look at whether it's the home vinegar, baking soda, or some produce washes that you can purchase at the store, and they don't seem to be any more effective.
Okay.
The vinegar being acidic, this organism may not care that much. We know that for items that are commercially washed, that the sanitizers that are used in commercial wash systems are really not very effective against Cyclospora, although they are effective against E. coli, Salmonella, and others. But this organism's a bit different.
What about freezing your produce or even in the refrigerator? Does the parasite seem to survive that?
It appears the parasite does survive refrigeration, and it may survive freezing. So for many parasites, they don't. Freeze-thaw cycles are used to destroy parasites in general. But for this one, the very first outbreak that I'm aware of was associated with raspberries that had been frozen.
Really?
And so
Okay.
it makes me a little bit concerned that we don't want to be overconfident about the impact that freezing might have in reducing the viability, the livelihood of this parasite.
If I cut into produce that has this parasite, Cyclospora, in it, could I then risk contaminating other foods in my kitchen?
So the risk of cross-contamination is always there. It would depend on the number of Cyclospora, and this one doesn't grow outside the host.
Right.
So for other types of products, if you cut something else, you leave it on the counter, even if you put it in the fridge, there might be increases in numbers. And we know that those Cyclospora that exist at the beginning are the same that are going to exist at the end, whether it's on your knife, on another food item. But there is the potential to cross-contaminate. It's not something that's been extensively studied, to the best of my knowledge.
We've talked a lot about food, but this can also spread through water. And even in bodies of water that you might be swimming in. It's hot outside. A lot of people are in bodies of water, including lakes. I imagine chlorinated pools, for example, that's not going to be a problem.
So chlorine, as best we can tell, doesn't have as much of an impact on Cyclospora as we would
Really?
hope.
Wow.
On the
This is a
bacterial
hardy
side,
parasite.
yes, it is a very hardy parasite. And there's a lot that we just don't know.
It can survive a chlorinated pool.
It may be able to survive a chlorinated pool.
Okay. What about lakes then? Obviously, they don't have chlorine in them. Would you jump in a lake right now?
A lake in my area, I would not hesitate to jump in a lake because I know that in this area where I live in Maryland, that the case counts aren't particularly high. And I would also think that if a lake was contaminated, that a lot more people would already be sick. If the lake had a sign on it, though, that, don't swim in this lake, there are high E. coli counts, then I would certainly respect that and adhere to that.
Yeah, pay attention to those warnings for sure. I think that's a good message. But look, I'm from Michigan. That's my home state. I got a lot of friends up there. It's hot up there as well. Should they not be jumping into lakes?
That's something where I do think it's worth looking at the region, the county that you're in. The state of Michigan has done a pretty good job reporting the number of cases by area, by county. And so I think you look and see, are you in a hot spot? And what precautions do your local officials advise?
Sounds like probably not a good idea right now.
I may not.
I mean, I'm just trying to be, I got kids, I got elderly parents, obviously I worry about myself. Doesn't sound like it'd be a great idea to be jumping in a lake in the midst of a Cyclospora outbreak.
Probably not.
Okay. Why is this happening now? And if you look at previous outbreaks, is it typically this time of year?
It is absolutely this time of year. This is considered Cyclospora season. So it's
Why
a
is
pretty
that?
predictable pattern year over year. Come June, July, that's when we're seeing higher numbers. by August, they're really starting to taper off. And as we head into the fall, other than those travel-associated cases, when we're looking at domestically acquired cases, they really go down. And we don't really understand why.
Huh. I mean, because you're presumably, if it's produce and it's contaminated irrigation, that's presumably happening year round.
Why the organism becomes infectious may be a factor in the seasonality, but what triggers that infectivity, we simply don't know. And so it's quite possible that the parasite is around us all the time, and it's just not making us sick.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do screening tests for this sort of thing.
No.
So we wouldn't possibly know. And not only do we not do screening tests, as you point out, there's maybe an 80-to-1 ratio in terms of people who are carrying the Cyclospora are infected versus people who are actually confirmed. So there's a lot of unknowns, it sounds like, when it comes to Cyclospora.
A lot of unknowns.
How are we doing, do you think, as a country in terms of surveillance? There's been a lot to be made of some of the changes to foodborne surveillance over the last couple of years. What kind of, are we seeing an impact of that with this outbreak?
When you see numbers this high, I'm not sure that we can attribute it to surveillance, although I am very concerned as we look toward the future that it's just really difficult now to get data to look for trends and patterns. And so this organism used to be one that I could go to a part of CDC's website and I could pull historical data. It was called FoodNet. It's an active surveillance system. But starting about a year ago, Cyclospora, as well as a number of other foodborne pathogens, were removed from that list. It went from 8 to 2. Cyclospora being one of the 6 that was cut. And so it is really disturbing to me that we just won't have the data. And without those measurement tools, without visibility, I think it'll be much more difficult to reflect on these outbreaks that have happened and be able to predict and hopefully act upon those outbreaks that might be in the future so that we can stop them or at least limit the impact.
We've established today that there could be maybe 100, 200,000 people who may be infected right now. Just if you look at the number of confirmed cases and you say there's an 80-to-1 sort of likelihood of more people being infected. So for every one infection, 80 others potentially infected. What is your recommendation then for people who are listening? Should they be doing anything different in their lives as a result of what's unfolding?
I think follow the news. Make sure that as public health investigators figure this out, and I'm reasonably confident, especially with these numbers, that they will, that you are well aware of any advisories, any recommendations, any recall notices that are coming out. Until that happens, I think it's assessing where you live. Are you living in a hot spot? Should you take any special precautions? But for many of us throughout the United States, we're not in hot spots. And I think we shouldn't be overly anxious in changing our behavior, avoiding foods that really are very healthy for us.
Okay. Doctor, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That was great. I learned a lot.
It's pretty fascinating.
And that was my conversation with microbiologist Dr. Jennifer McIntyre, founder of Food Safety Strategy. Look, I hope this helped you through some of the confusion around Cyclospora and gave you a better understanding of just how to protect yourself and why these outbreaks can be so challenging to track in the first place. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.